Welcome. Lock your doors. Turn off the lights and try to get comfortable while I read you a story. Tonight's story is The Lady in White. It was 11:42 p.m. on a Saturday night. I had just dropped off my last passenger for the day, and as I began to drive my cab back towards work, I imagined my soft, cozy bed that I knew was waiting for me. My eyelids grew heavy. It had been a full day of picking up and dropping off people, as it normally was on weekends, and all I wanted to do was call it a night. I struggled to keep my eyes open, straightening my body and rubbing my eyes to stay awake. But when I awoke to the sound of a car horn and found the car halfway on the other side of the road, I knew it was time to pull over. I drove to a street I knew was almost always deserted, especially at this time of night, and took a short nap to re-energize me for the drive home. I parked under a dimly lit street lamp and let sleep pull me under. It felt like I had only been asleep for a few minutes when I was jolted awake to the sound of loud and frantic knocking on the car door. Disoriented, I blearily looked around to see who had woken me up. It was dark, and it took a while for my eyes to acclimate to my surroundings. But finally, as I turned toward the rear passenger door, I could make out a shadowy figure. In that moment, I couldn't tell you why I did what I did. Maybe it was a cab driver's impulse. Maybe it was because I had just woken up and my sleep-muddled brain couldn't catch up in time. Or maybe it was just because I had never been the sharpest tool in the shed. Whatever the reason. I unlocked the car doors. Looking into the rear view mirror, I heard a click and saw the car door open. The person entered the car and shut the door. Once in the car, I could see the person was a woman. Her face was shadowed, but I could see that her long, dark hair draped over a white nightgown, the only discernible feature I could make out in the dark. I turned around, about to say something, probably to inquire why this woman was on a deserted road in the middle of the night, when her hand suddenly shot out towards me. My eyes darted toward the hand. Alarm bells were ringing in my head as I prepared myself for a physical assault, but all movement stopped once the hand had fully been extended. I registered that she was holding something between her thumb and forefinger. It was a piece of paper. She held it mid-air, offering it silently for me to take. I stared, my eyes narrowing in confusion and mild suspicion, before I reached out and hesitantly accepted it. In the distance, I heard the faint rumbling of thunder. It was about to rain soon. Cautiously, I examined the piece of paper in the darkness of the car. I couldn't inspect it as thoroughly as I wanted to, but from what little I could see on the piece of the paper, scribbled out in a messy scroll, was an unfamiliar address. Out of muscle memory, I entered the address into my phone's GPS and found that it was less than a half-hour's drive away. I turned around in my seat and faced the woman, wondering what her deal was. A moment of unnerving silence. I turned back to face the wheel, her eyes burning into the back of my head. This whole situation was very strange, but no matter how bizarre I found the circumstances, I couldn't bring myself to stop. Something was holding me back. An unsettling feeling deep in my bones told me to just drive and not question anything. Reluctantly, I pulled into the street and started driving. The atmosphere in the car could only be described as tense. Then it started to rain. As I continued driving, I found that my eyes kept flicking towards the rear view mirror to look at the passenger. I had the most inexplicable feeling that she would disappear at any moment. But no matter how many times I looked, she was still there. She remained unmoving like a statue, almost as if she wasn't even breathing. Every little sound now seemed intensified within the silence. The little pit-patters of rain dropping onto the surface of the car, the creaking of the car wipers as they swiped from right to left, and the telltale clicking of the turn signal when I came to a junction. All these tiny sounds which would normally go by unnoticed, now made me very uneasy. I reached for the radio, hoping to fill the silence, but was met with prickling static. Dismayed, I turned the radio off and decided to fill the silence the only other way I knew how, by talking. So I know it's none of my business, but what's got you taking a cab at this time of night? Got a meeting to go to. I tried to joke. The air was still as I received no response. This place must be real special if it's gotten you out of the house at such a late hour. I tried again. Dead silence. You got someone waiting for you there? Anyone who knows you're out here? At that question, I finally got a response, one which made me regret speaking up at all. It was a low growl, something you would normally hear a frightened animal make. It stopped me dead in my tracks. I forced my mind to focus on driving so as to not crash the car out of shock. The rest of the journey was spent in deliberate silence, as I didn't dare ask any more questions. I was scared of something else happening, something more ominous than just a growl. Reaching a traffic light, I tapped my finger on the steering wheel. Restlessly, I stared at the red light with bated breath, willing it to just turn green so that I could get to the destination and drop off the passenger as soon as possible. Looking around, I realized the rain had gotten heavier and was now pouring onto the streets. I glanced at the rear-view mirror, expecting to once again see the vague silhouette of the passenger. But what I saw instead made me turn around in horror. The face of the woman was now visible under the well-lit streetlights of the cross junction. I breathed in sharply as I saw that the whole right side of her face was bright red, covered in peeling burn marks and blistering skin. The wounds looked fresh, as if they were only recently inflicted in silent terror. I noticed the blank stare of her glossy gray eyes gazing into the distance. Her pupils were hollow and unfocused, void of any emotion. I felt a chill go down my spine as her empty, soulless eyes turned towards me. I couldn't stop myself from letting out a horrified gasp. Maybe he did go. I realized my mistake as soon as I made it. The empty, soulless eyes hardened, then came to life. There was now a burning fire in that previously vacant stare. I had angered her, not her. My mind supplied it to that degree. Then you're saying that when someone sees Freddy Krueger, that they should be compassionate? The same hair-raising growl from before snaps me out of my stupor, and I floor at the gas pedal. Traffic light be damned. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins as I drove. With reckless abandonment, with sweat dripping down my face, I directed my attention to the splash of my car tires against the rain, which was now coming down in buckets. I forced my eyes onto the puddles of water on the road, ensuring that they didn't drift towards the rear view mirror. I didn't know what I would find if I looked, and I definitely didn't want to find out. I drove and drove, my mind in a mental state of disarray. All I could think of was getting to the drop-off address. We were now in the hills, and I drove my cab as quickly and carefully as I could around the winding turns in the rain. Suddenly, it was a straight road. With each second, I built up courage to add a bit more gas, hoping to reach the destination faster. The little bravado I had left flew straight out the window when I was forced to immediately hit the brakes, my hands tightening around the wheel to brace myself. I had driven right to the edge of a cliff. There was maybe around 3 feet of ground between my car and the edge of what I assumed was a long way down, and I let out a shaky sigh. I checked my phone to see if this was the right location, and to my relief, it was. All of a sudden, I heard the click of the car door opening, the sound of the pouring rain in the open air, then the car door closing. Even while hearing all of this, I kept my head strictly towards the front of the car, facing the cliff. I could see in the periphery of my vision that she was moving slowly in the rain, and I watched in trepidation as she walked directly in front of my car and stood right at the edge of the cliff, her back facing towards me. There was a mild ringing noise in my ears, and my heart was beating out of my chest. The winds were howling, and I held my breath for what would happen next. It all happened so fast that I almost missed it. A flash of lightning struck, followed by the deafening roar of thunder, and then she was gone, over the ledge. I stepped out of the car, moving towards the edge carefully with my phone in my hand. I used my phone as a flashlight and peered over the cliff. There was nothing there but wet rocks and sand. I drove home that night, shaken to the core. I had never believed in ghosts before, but after that night, you could say that I was a lot more open to the idea. Despite my exhaustion, I got no sleep that night. I would never sleep in my car again, and I would never tell anyone what happened. Some days, I feel like the events of that night are just a distant memory, but I never let myself get comfortable enough to forget. Whenever things get too convenient, I open the glove box and pull it out, it being the note from that night, solid and firm in my hands. It's a harsh reminder that everything I witnessed was real, and I hadn't just imagined it. I keep it as a warning to always be wary of the passengers I pick up, because I can never know if the passenger I have in my car at that very moment could be my last. That wraps up the story for tonight. If you're craving more, check out my other stories. Thank you for listening, and have sweet dreams.